Israeli Ambassador to Germany Jeremy Issacharoff, thank you very much for coming on the Spin Room today.
My pleasure.
Ambassador, I'd like to begin with what's certainly at the top of Angela Merkel's agenda on her visit to Israel, this deep fracture with Jerusalem over the Iran nuclear deal. On the one hand, Israel's security is important to Germany, but on the other hand, Germany is one of the strongest supporters of the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, a deal that the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, strongly opposes and claims that it threatens Israel's existence. What is the way forward on this paradox?
Well, first of all, I'd say that the Chancellor's commitment to Israel's security since her speech in the Knesset in Jerusalem in 2008 has been very substantial and has become a cornerstone, I'd say, of German foreign policy. So I would say her contribution to the conceptual underpinning of the relationship has been very, very significant. I wouldn't agree with you of how you characterize this as a major fracture. First of all, we have very intense, continuous discussions between Germany and Israel at all levels, and the Prime Minister was in Berlin at the beginning of June for a very long, in-depth conversation with the Germans. We have a lot of conversations going on, as I said, at other levels as well. So first of all, we understand each other's positions. And I also emphasize the fact that there is no difference between Israel and Germany in terms of the objective, which is to prevent Iran acquiring any military nuclear capability. I'd also say that there's a great deal of agreement regarding the very aggressive Iranian missile program and also the problematic Iranian involvement in the region as a whole. So as I look at it from my standpoint, I'd see there is still a substantial amount of agreement on Iran. There is a difference regarding the JCPOA, but it's not something that we don't talk about and we continue to exchange views on.
In his United Nations General Assembly speech last week, the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, accused European nations of appeasing Iran, later saying to CNN that, quote, "The Europeans still claim to what they'd like Iran to be rather than what Iran is." What can Israel do to make Germany alter the lenses by which it views Iran?
Look, we're doing what we are doing, as I said already. We have a very heavy engagement with the Germans at all levels, and we will continue a very in-depth discussion with them. Look, our relationship covers a number of different issues. It's not just talking about Iran and the challenges it presents as Iran in the nuclear, the missile area. We talk a lot about Syria, the challenges we have now in Syria and the Iranian involvement there, the Russian dimension. And actually, there are a lot more issues that Israel and Germany are talking about in which we have quite a high measure of agreement.
I want to move on to the peace process. Merkel and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas last met in March 2017, and she stated and she's reiterated since then that she's frustrated with the Israeli settlement policy, to which many accredit as the reason that it's been 4 years since her last visit to Israel. What role does Germany play in the peace process today, and what should Berlin be doing to get the parties back to the negotiating table?
To be frank with you, I think that first of all, you have to take into account the German foreign policy today is dealing with a number of major issues on let's say, the political agenda, the international political agenda. I think that the role that they played and have played over the years has not been central in the same way that the role of the Americans has been in the peace process. And I think that they, also begin to realize, my feeling is that they begin to realize that the Palestinian issue, I mean, when you look at other issues that have been on the agenda, look, the civil war in Syria has had a massive effect also on the internal complexion of Germany in terms of how the immigration issue has come onto the table and has increased the number of foreign immigrants into the country. And I believe that they still attach importance to discussing and furthering a dialogue with the Palestinians, as indeed did the Prime Minister in his speech in the UN. So I think that they want to move that process forward, but they also realize that there are some objective differences. It's not just Israel. And I'm beginning to feel that, and I might be wrong on this, but, they also see that the issue of settlements is not necessarily the thing that is stopping the negotiations. You know, you need both sides to come together and have a serious discussion, as has been said a number of times, without preconditions.
Let's talk a little about domestic trends in Germany that are a bit disconcerting. The latest polls see the far-right Alternative for Germany party, AfD, as the second strongest party in Germany, between 15 and 18% before the SPD, the Social Democrats. Do you find this trend worrying?
I think it's really important that Israel has to be, we're very much focused on this issue of anti-Semitism. We should be focused on it not just as it relates to the right wing of the political spectrum. We should also look at the left wing of the political spectrum, all elements of possible sources of anti-Semitism. Also from the immigrants that have come from countries where anti-Semitism has pretty much been in their DNA. And I think it's, to me, first of all, I've seen a very consistent, hard condemnation by the German government and German leaders in general to any form of anti-Semitism. But I also see that this is something which doesn't constitute just an assault on Jews, on Israelis, but it also constitutes an assault on the democratic, pluralistic, tolerant nature of Germany as it's developed since the last war.
The AfD is about to have a group of Jewish representatives show their support for the party. What do you have to say to those Jews who support the AfD?
I would ask them to very seriously consider their support. I don't like to interfere internally into German politics, but as I've said, I think there are certain things that have been said by leaders of this party who have at least a very strong sense of nostalgia for the Nazi past, and I would very much urge them to reconsider hooking up their wagon to this way of thinking.
Ambassador, you wrote in an op-ed that it's important to bear in mind a clear generational change occurring in both countries, Israel and Germany. The new generation in Germany is less concerned about Jewish causes, and Israel feels less obligated towards Israel. What can be done to engage these new coming-uppers?
One of the things that I have been personally committed to is to try and extend as much as possible the youth exchange between the schools, between Israelis and Germans. A lot of Israelis are coming to visit in Germany, but I want German kids to come to visit in Israel. There could also be professional exchanges, working in their German people who come, youngsters that come and volunteer, helping Holocaust survivors, elderly people and disabled people for a year. Why broaden these programs as much as possible? Change, exchanges between young journalists and other potential leaders and younger leaders in the various parties in the German spectrum. So a lot of these issues, I think, can make a massive difference in dealing with this change in generations. In Israel, I found it very interesting to see how the attitude to Germany has, I think, changed. It's evolved. And I think, you know, as much as I can see, I've been confronted in a positive way with such incredible friendship from my German colleagues that is a lot emanated from these kind of youth exchanges that we've had in the past. So we look at it, and I see it as being absolutely a strategic objective for the future relations of Israel and Germany.
Ambassador Jeremy Issacharoff, thank you very much for coming on the Spin Room today.
My pleasure.